Okay, guys, we are live for All Things AS with Amanda. Thank you for joining us tonight. I have two of my most favorite people online with me, and so you're in for a real treat if you're watching tonight. We all have our drink, whether it is an adult or not. So I'm hoping that you're sitting home as well in doing that. But tonight we're going to talk things all clinics and all things ladder. Ladder, you may be like, what the heck is that? I've never heard of it before. Well, you're going to learn more about it tonight. But first, I'm going to ask my lovely friends here to introduce themselves. So, Anne, would you mind going first and telling the community who you are? And then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. I am Ann Wheeler. I am a psychologist and a researcher, and most of my work is done through RTI International, which is a nonprofit research institute. And most of the work that I do is focused on helping support individuals with rare neurogenetic conditions like Angelman syndrome and their families. I am the project director of the Ladder program, so we'll be talking about that soon. And I'm also the psychologist on the UNC clinic. So if you ever come to UNC, you'll see me.
So Anne is a rock star in the Angelman community in so many different ways. And I am trying to remember the first time I met Anne, but she's left such an impression with me just because I love her heart and her spirit for the community. And I just love working with her. So thank you so much for being on tonight and for all the work you're doing in the community. And Dr. Liz Gelazzo is with us as well. Liz, most people in the community know you, but just in case, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Liz Gelazzo. I am the clinical director for the Angelman Syndrome Foundation. My day job is as a clinical geneticist at UNC Chapel Hill. So all of our North Carolina, probably Virginia, South Carolina crew, we shouldn't be stranger faces to any of you. If you come to the Chapel Hill Clinic, you're going to see both of us, Anna and myself, as well as the rest of our team. But I am also additionally a parent of a 6-year-old with Angelman syndrome, Evelyn, who is the reason why I do what I do every day, for sure. And now you've inspired me to think about the first time that I met Anne.
I know, right? I was trying to remember, and I couldn't remember. I remember the first time I met you, Liz, and you had much longer hair, and it was our first board meeting, fresh, like, doughy-eyed, ready to change the world, board members of the Angelman Syndrome Foundation, and look at us now. So I don't remember the first time I met Anne, though. Do you remember?
I think it was probably at a clinic visit.
I think so. So I can remember the first time I've heard of both of you.
Oh.
Amanda, we talked to each other on a call that was initiated by Eileen way back in the beginning of the very, very, very start of thinking about Ladder. And you were on a call. You hadn't taken over the ASF yet. You were just being introduced.
Oh, wow.
So I remember talking to you then. And Liz, I'm pretty sure, I know Margaret Doremus brought you up at a clinic meeting about, I just talked to this fantastic parent who's also a clinician, and she's moving to Chapel Hill.
I was going to say, our first visit might have been a clinic visit, our first interaction, or it might have been late night at one of the Angelman conferences.
That could be it too.
Hey, either way, those late nights at the Angelman conferences are the best ones, right?
They are.
Well, thank you guys. We have a lot of people watching right now. So just so you guys know, if you have questions, add them to the chat. Catherine, who is our resource director, is watching and will be able to answer as much as she can. Unfortunately, for some reason, I can't see the chat going on. So if there's questions that come up, I'm going to ask Catherine to text them to us so we can make sure we answer them tonight. But let's get started. Maybe, first of all, let's start with you, Liz. Can you give like a 15-second, well, not 15-second, but a very short like elevator speech on what the Angelman syndrome clinics are and a little bit of how it relates to the 15Q clinic network?
Sure. Yeah. So the Angelman syndrome clinics are a network of clinics really around the country, but really actually around the world, where our goal is to provide first and foremost excellent evidence-based, where it's possible, clinical care, so that a family of an individual with Angelman syndrome can come in and really receive like one-stop, top to bottom care for any issues that might be going on with their loved one. So really, the goal is to provide first and foremost excellent care, medical care. So this should be a place where you walk in and the people know Angelman syndrome. They know, the challenges, that your individual might be having, or, the strengths that children with Angelman syndrome have. And so, this should really be that opportunity to see the expert. As a clinician myself, I really struggled in those early years before we established care with one of the Angelman clinics to find people in my local area that knew Angelman syndrome, right? I mean, I was had access to top doctors and, a top hospital, but Angelman syndrome wasn't what they did all day, every day. And so, and it's certainly not all that our clinicians do, but, by seeing patients either, a whole day a month, a couple of days a month. And we're getting some feedback here.
No, you're good. Go for it. Sorry.
Well, in the case of, like Dr. Thiebert in the Mass General Clinic, they're seeing patients with Angelman syndrome multiple days a week. So that's a place where the doctors really, and all the providers really know Angelman syndrome and can really provide, both expert guidance for you as the family, but also, a treatment plan and guidance for your local medical team, because we understand that not everybody lives nearby to an Angelman syndrome clinic. How the ASF clinics fit into the larger 15Q clinical research network. So in 2019, I think we had 8 clinics, domestic clinics in 2019, and we knew that we were not reaching all of our families with Angelman syndrome, and that it was just a really big burden on families to have to travel so far to get to clinical sites. And we had already been partnering with the Duke 15Q Alliance from a research standpoint for a decade or more. For those who don't understand the connection, or maybe are newer to the community, so Angelman syndrome is caused by, a loss of that genetic information on this critical region of the 15th chromosome, and duplication 15Q is caused by extra genetic material on that critical region. So a lot of our researchers are researching both disorders, and sometimes discoveries that we find in one disorder are beneficial to advancing science in the other disorder. And what we also recognized pretty quickly were that the clinicians that were caring for children with Duke 15Q syndrome were the same clinicians in that hospital that were caring for Angelman syndrome patients. And so in 2019, we entered into a strategic relationship with the Duke 15Q community as well, to really combine our 2 clinic networks to expand our geographic reach within the United States. Again, we've had these international clinics for several years now, and they're seeing a lot of patients internationally, but we really wanted to expand the reach within the United States. Again, primarily to provide this excellent care, but also to serve as a platform for research as well as clinical trials, which we'll talk a little bit more about later.
That was a great overall kind of, no, it was perfect. And some questions that are coming through that maybe I'll just go ahead and already ask. The question we get a lot is, like, one of the questions is, when are we going to get a clinic in the Pacific, I think it was Northwest.
Pacific Northwest.
Northwest. Yeah. Or when are we going to get a clinic in Arizona? Or, when are we going to get a clinic in our place? So can you maybe speak briefly to maybe the strategic vision of the foundation when it comes to bringing on new clinics, what that looks like?
Yeah. So, we would love to have a clinic in every state. That would be phenomenal. The initial goal of the foundation was to have clinics within 4 hours of driving distance for every family with Angelman syndrome. So we have heat maps, and, we know where all of our families, at least who are registered with the ASF, live. And we're mapping, how long is it going to take this family to get to their closest clinic? And so the goal was to get a clinic within 4 hours driving distance. And we're close to that, but certainly there are definitely big pockets of areas that are not, are not served currently. And we know that. So the process by which, anybody could hang a shingle and say that they have an Angelman syndrome clinic, but our goal is to really have providers, again, who are invested in the community. And that might mean that they're just really interested in learning more about the community. They may not come in as full-fledged experts, right? Nobody can. And so part of the network is actually a learning network. And so every month our clinicians get on a call and we talk about different issues in Angelman syndrome and Dup15q. A lot of the issues overlap. And so, this is another area of commonality when we talk about GI issues. A lot of the GI issues that children with Angelman syndrome or adults with Angelman syndrome have are similar to the ones that children and adults with Dup15q syndrome or seizures. While the management might be slightly different, the clinicians all get together and we talk about what's the best practices in management, so that when you show up at one of these clinics, while it may not be the clinic that has seen 400 patients with Angelman syndrome or Dup15q, they have that expertise in their back pocket. They've learned from that clinician, and they have that clinician like on speed dial. So if there are areas that are not feeling the love, that they, that they don't have clinics, the best way, what we would love is, we kind of constantly have a pipeline of sites that we're eyeing as next sites, that, places where we know we're not serving our community, and who we might be scouting out as a clinician who is already seeing a number of patients, or who has demonstrated an interest, maybe is coming to our scientific meetings, coming to the clinical meetings, already listening in on the clinician calls, even though they're not necessarily a designated site. If you know that you and your 10 best friends from the 3 states around you are all seeing one doctor, let us know that.
Tell us, yeah.
To the doctor, or you can, and start initiating that conversation with them. We would love to bring on more clinic sites. Again, we know that, it's needed both from a medical care standpoint, but also needed from, eventually, hopefully, excitingly, a clinical trial standpoint.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a good point. I think that as much as the community can inform us of those people that are out there, we can start having those conversations and facilitate those. So that's a really good point. So there's some questions specifically about the clinics that I want to ask, and then I want to get into ladder, because ladder is such an important part about that. But Anne, you can answer this because you do clinics. You're part of the AS clinic network all the time. What can a parent expect when they go to a clinic?
Anne might be the best person to answer this.
Yeah.
Well, and I can only speak to the UNC clinic, and I know there are, different clinics have different models for how they do things. But I'll walk you through a day at the UNC clinic, and then, you can sort of use that as a foundation for thinking about what other clinics might do. So what we have an interdisciplinary team. Actually, we consider ourselves transdisciplinary, which basically means we cross-train and we learn what the other folks are doing. And we have medical providers on the team, like Liz, also a genetic counselor, a psychiatrist. We have psychology, we have speech language pathology, OT, PT, nutrition as needed, GI as needed. And a family would come to the clinic, and we would initially have you fill out quite a number of questionnaires, although we've hopefully streamlined that quite a bit with the ladder database. And then we would use the data that you provide us in that initial form to sort of help guide what we'll prioritize for you in the clinic. But you would meet with all of the disciplines that are either you requested to see or that were deemed would be beneficial to have you talk with, based on the needs from the forms. And then you have a chance to talk to each person, and there will be usually some interaction with your loved one with Angelman syndrome. Sometimes it'll be some testing. Sometimes it'll just be working on thinking about different ways that we might help with communication. So trying out different types of tools. There might be a physical exam depending on the needs and the requests. And then we try to hit all of your main concerns. That's our priority during the day. And then any other concerns we may percolate on afterwards to try to help pull strategies in. And then at the end, usually within a month to 6 weeks, you'll get a full report that outlines all the things that we learned, and all of and any strategies you think might be helpful, we might think might be helpful for you. We'll also have consultations with local physicians or teachers or allied health professionals to give additional information about Angelman syndrome from the Angelman clinician expert perspective. Especially that can be helpful for allied health professionals or physicians who don't have experience with Angelman. I miss anything?
That's amazing. No, that's amazing. I mean, that's super comprehensive, right? I mean, I think for any parent who has an individual with Angelman syndrome, being able to come to a clinic and have that expertise and have those conversations. It's such a relief, because the one thing that we know as parents all the time is we constantly feel like we're teaching doctors about Angelman syndrome, or telling them like, you should treat them by using this, this, and this. And so being able to go to a clinic to where you're not doing that, and you can actually be a parent instead of like a nurse and a doctor, neurologist or whatever, is really, really refreshing. And so I think that's that's really, really important. So there's some questions coming in just a minute. Liz, maybe you can answer this. For someone who lives out of state or lives not in the same city as a clinic, what advice do you give them if they go to a clinic? Would that be their primary care team, or should they have a care team at home?
Yeah. So we get this question a lot. If you're out of state, it's really challenging to have an out-of-state clinic be your primary doc. It's challenging, particularly for Medicaid, to get Medicaid to cover medications that are written by an out-of-state provider. It's challenging sometimes even just to get Medicaid to pay for a visit to an out-of-state clinic. But there are forms that, like basically a prior approval, or basically your home doctor has to say, there's a need to go out of state for this specialty care. So there are ways around that issue. But, we generally encourage families to still have a local provider that can be the one writing prescriptions. If you have an emergency, that's going to be your local hospital. They need to know what's going on as well. So, I think this sometimes can be a challenging dynamic to try to find a local provider who's comfortable working closely with the expert provider, but these doctors are out there, absolutely. And I think most doctors want to do that, because they know that that's what's best for the family. And a lot of times, with rare genetic disorders, a primary care doc may feel completely out of their wheelhouse, trying to manage something like this. Or even a local neurologist might say, I'm more than happy to have this guidance from the Angelman expert. But at the end of the day, they might still need to be the one writing the medications, or ordering the EEG when you need it, or, calling the admission when you need it. And that's an opportunity for them to work really well together. And then sometimes that local provider becomes known as the one who's really great at being that local provider. And then they morph into being in the Angelman network, because they've demonstrated again that they're doing a really fabulous job caring for folks with Angelman syndrome, and that they really have an interest in Angelman or other neurodevelopmental disorders. And so that can be a
best case scenario, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. For sure.
We see that a lot, families that will travel to a clinic site, but all the families in that area still have one common local neurologist. And we try to engage that local neurologist to include them in the monthly clinic calls, so that so that they have access to as much of that, latest and greatest expertise as they can.
Absolutely. So really quickly, if someone was interested in going to a clinic, what's the first step? Where should they go? All that information.
I think the first step is going to the website to look at where the different clinic sites are. You might not know that there's some sites in the Pacific Northwest or other locations, because maybe they're not getting as much publicity. They're not necessarily like running clinical trials right now or something like that. So go first to the website, see what your local site is. The next person that can be most helpful in this scenario is Zoe. Zoe is the coordinator of the 15Q Clinical Research Network, and she can really help guide, well, this is your local clinic, but this is their kind of niche area of expertise, but your question is really about speech. Let's figure out a way to get you to see Margaret Doremus at the UNC clinic, or, your issue really is really difficult to control seizures. Where's your closest really strong epileptologist? And then if that's out of state and it's going to be a flight and your insurance isn't wanting to pay for it, that's when we can talk about applying for the Angelman Family Fund or the SF Family Fund to get some funds to help pay for getting to a clinic.
I'm glad you brought that out. I was going to say that, because the goal with the Angelman Family Fund is that actually it was created to make sure families had access to get to clinics. And so that fund happens twice a year, in April and in October. And our goal is to be able to provide as much funding as we can to be able to get people to these clinics. And also, for those of you that can't get a clinic, there's also resources that the clinical network have created to support our families in clinical care. And we just released a few really really cool ones in the last couple weeks or so. Liz, can you just maybe briefly talk about those resources, and then we're going to jump into Ladder.
Sure. Well, first I'll say, and this does segue nicely into Ladder, I think. So first I'll say, if you're interested in going to a clinic, you don't necessarily have to go through Zoe. If you're having trouble figuring out which clinic you might want to go to, you can go to Zoe. Or if you've contacted the clinic and you're not hearing back, then you can go to Zoe. But contact information for each of the clinics is available on the website. So there should be an easy, like a number and an email. So you should be able to contact any of the sites that you're interested in going to. And sometimes families make, call multiple clinics and kind of get a sense of what the day might look like at multiple different clinics, or, do that before they make a decision about where they're going to go. All right, the resources that have recently come out of the Clinical Research Network. So, we identified through the community needs that this first seizure event and how to manage that is A, incredibly stressful for families, and B, managed very, very differently depending on where you show up, right? So if you show up in a little community hospital versus, Mass General Hospital or UNC, the management might be different. And what we know from, 20 years of collecting data about seizures and Angelman syndrome is that there are medications that tend to work better for individuals with Angelman syndrome. That's not to say that all children or adults fit the mold, but we know that there are certain medications that tend to work really well, and there's certain medicines that don't tend to work as well or tend to have more side effects in Angelman syndrome. And this is where we can kind of segue to Ladder about how we collect that data. But we recently put out basically a seizure one-pager that's for you to present. Have this in your back pocket, store it on your phone, have a snapshot of it. If you're worried that your child has had a seizure, or you've called your local neurologist and your neurologist is saying, yep, sounds like a seizure, let's come in and take a look at her or him, you bring that document with you. And this is basically the collective, decision or recommendations from the Angelman experts. We likewise did a similar document for providers. You have in your back pocket, you can dole this out at any time you think you need it, is outpatient management of non-convulsive status epilepticus. This is something that you guys hear about a ton in the community. People are, constantly worried, not constantly, but not infrequently worried about, whether their child might be in non-convulsive status, these kind of subclinical seizures that you can't see. And again, from 20 years of history of managing patients with non-convulsive status, the group was able to come together and say, this is actually a reasonable way to manage this, which, is certainly not going to be common knowledge to every neurologist out in the community, or, most of the time you're not even seeing a neurologist, you're seeing an ER doc, right? Who's making a decision about being admitted and started on some medicine. But if you walk in with this consensus statement that says, this is how we should manage this, it even has pretty pictures of what non-convulsive status looks like on an EEG and what it doesn't look like on an EEG. So it's a really helpful resource to empower parents, but also to empower doctors out in the community to say, okay, I can use this resource. I can say, yep, this does look like this, and here's my 1, 2, 3 and how to treat this. So again, the goal at the end of the day was to get the expertise out of the few people that are siloed around the country and really make that accessible to families, to community doctors, to doctors all across the country and across the world to better care for people with Angelman syndrome.
And hopefully, Catherine, if you can put those links in the comment box of where you can get those resources. They're online under seizures. Another resource that's part of that, a part of that form is also the 24-hour clinician to clinician hotline that was funded by FAST recently, that is being overseen by a couple of the AS clinicians. Also, if you want to have your clinician, your doctor wants to have a consultation with one of the AS clinics, that's a great hotline to access as well. So we only have a little while left. So Anne, let's get into what this exciting thing is called Ladder, because most of our community probably don't know what Ladder is, what it means, why we have funded it, why it's important to research, to trials, all that fun stuff. So I'm going to put you on the spot and have you answer that very big question.
All right, I will do my best. So we've been hinting at this for the whole half hour. So
right.
Let's start with Ladder, what it means, what it stands for. So Ladder stands for Linking Angelman and Do15Q databases for expanded research. It's an exciting name for a very long and maybe more complicated type of term. But basically, when we think about data, and data may seem really boring and not, this isn't that relevant. But when you think about any sort of rare condition, like Liz was just describing, it takes a long time for just a handful of clinicians to build the knowledge base that is needed in order to make empirically based and excellent clinical decisions for a particular for that particular rare condition. And so what we want to do is really put the power in y'all's hands as parents and caregivers to provide the information back into the community in a really streamlined way. So before we had Ladder, families might go to a clinic and maybe some data was collected, maybe it was, there were some questions asked that just went into a folder or a file and got stuck in a filing cabinet. Maybe you participated in a research study, but the research folks don't really know what's happening on a day-to-day basis in the clinic. Maybe you participate in registries, but we don't have that information then linked to anything that's actually meaningful on a day-to-day basis. So what we intended with Ladder is to allow us to bring together all of the places that you might provide information about your loved one with Angelman into one place that then we can maximize. We can build on each person that puts information into the database to make decisions that are reflecting what's actually happening with individuals with Angelman and their families. And so so the way this works is we now have standardized forms that will be used in all of the clinics. So it doesn't matter which clinic you go to, you'll get the same set of questions. And if you enroll in Ladder, then those questions will be answered, will go to your clinician, and will also be loaded into Ladder. So then we'll have that information on that you completed that day. If you go to a different clinic next year, they will have that information that new clinician can see, plus you get to update those forms. And so we'll be able to keep track of what's happening with your particular family member, but then we'll also be able to have all of that information on any person who goes to a clinic across the country or even potentially internationally at some point. And then if you also participate in the natural history study, we can use that data and link it to your clinical data so that we have a much richer amount of information, and you won't have to do anything other than say, yes, it's okay for me to do that. And that's all online. So so we're excited about this. I think it's going to accelerate what we know and the power behind the recommendations we can make in clinic. And it's also going to be critically important for clinical trials to have a rich natural history resource that they can use to compare what the treatments do on the other end.
So, Anne, how is it being used already?
Yeah, so it's already being used in the ways we've been talking about. So we have, we take the data that is also just an important point here. So we within the Ladder system will know who you all are, but nobody else on the outside knows. So you give us the information, the clinic information, whatever information, it's stripped of any identifier. So no one could go in and say, oh, I see all of these things were filled out by Liz Gelazzo on this date. No, we won't have any of that information about even one individual's information. But then what we can do is take all of that de-identified, which is the term we use to say we've taken anything that we can identify you with, and package it up for people who want to ask questions about Angelman. So for example, some of the companies that are considering or in the process of establishing clinical trials, for therapeutic, they have asked us for specific information about like the history of early development in individuals with Angelman using the Bailey, which is a common measure that we use to understand development. So that's already being done, and we're pulling in data that already exists. So we'll have historic data across the board from research projects that have already been undergoing, or if you've been in a clinic that has collected information already, that data may already be in Ladder.
So we kind of nicknamed Ladder in some ways like the brain of Angelman data. What we noticed was that we had a lot of data being collected in multiple places, but it was hard to access, right? To get it and to get it to these industries that are really working hard to get a treatment for individuals with Angelman syndrome. So that I think that's the really cool thing about Ladder, is that it is a place that is talking and working with all different data sets within the Angelman space. And so I think that's super cool. So if a parent, let's say a parent doesn't go to a clinic, but still wants to be involved and give their information, like what's the process for them?
Absolutely. All you need to do is go and sign up for Ladder, and you will get an initial set of questions. And then if you don't go to a clinic, you may get the set of questions in a different time point to give us all the information that we would want, that we would normally get if you go to a clinic. And then we'll also be looking at, if you participate in a natural history study, we can pull that in. If you were involved in the Global Angelman Syndrome Registry, we will be talking to them as well, so that all that information will be streamlined.
Yeah, the important thing was that we were really partnering as much as possible with the Global Angelman Registry, which is a very important international registry, as well as the Natural History Study, which is a study that's been going on for years by Winhan and his crew that is incredibly important. And we're so thankful for all the families who already take part in the natural history study, and you can still take part in it. We still want to encourage people to do that. So I think that was like the really cool thing about it. The link to Ladder is already in the chat. And so we encourage families that are on right now, because we have a good amount of people that are on, to go ahead, click on and go ahead and give your information. It takes about anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes to complete, if I remember correctly, right, Liz? I think when I did it was about that.
Those are the clinic forms. Just to enroll should only take maybe 5 or 10 minutes.
Yes.
And then you get the clinic forms at a different time. So just to get enrolled and on our lists, and able to link your data, all you need to do is fill out the enrollment form.
So someone asks, how do I know if my Angel's data is already in Ladder? Good question.
Well,
That's a good question.
We will not know unless you've enrolled.
Yeah.
So because all the data that's currently in Ladder is de-identified, but we can re-identify some of it if you've enrolled. There is some data that where it was given, the rules are that they can't give us any way to re-identify it ever. So in that situation, we won't know. But if you participated in the natural history study, we'll ask you about that. If you have gone to a clinic, we'll ask you about that, and that'll help us be able to identify if the data is already in there.
And I just want to add, just to drive home the point here about why natural history data is important. Yeah. So if a drug developer comes into the space and says, I want to develop a gene therapy for Angelman syndrome, and they go to the FDA and, say they have beautiful mouse data, they have beautiful, everything they need. They go to the FDA, the first question the FDA is going to say is, what do you have natural history data, right? For any rare genetic disorder. And if you don't have natural history data, it's not a non-starter, but the FDA is either going to say you have to do a placebo-controlled arm. So some percentage of your participants are not getting drug and some are, so that you can compare, because you don't already know what the natural history of this disorder looks like. Or they'll say, actually, you need to go do a natural history study. You need to spend 2 years, $1 billion. I don't know how much it is. Probably not. Doing a natural history study. So this is an incredible asset, and that the Angelman syndrome community has, and the Duke 15 community has. So this is huge, and contributing to this is really, families are asking, what can I do to expedite drug development? Yeah. It's participating in Ladder, actually. I know it doesn't seem like that. You're already filling out these forms when you go to a clinic. This is just utilizing that information that you were already giving to the clinician to help provide excellent care for your child or your adult. You're allowing that information, that hard-earned time that you've spent, to be used for drug development as well, or to answer important clinical questions. If somebody wants to develop a therapeutic for GI issues, we can quickly go to Ladder and say, what do the GI issues look like in Angelman syndrome, both as a clinician reported, how do clinicians describe it, but also how do parents describe the GI issues. If you know that, it's a lot easier to be able to develop a drug, do a clinical trial, and say, actually, this drug is working because it's changing it from this baseline information. So this is really a tangible thing that families can do to contribute to the process in this time that can often feel really kind of helpless.
Mm-hmm. So either one of you can answer this question, because I think it's an interesting question, but someone asked, my daughter is 39 and is deletion positive. Will this help her? I know it's a vague question, but how can Ladder help her if she got engaged or involved with this, or even going to a clinic? Like, it's a big question.
I have a response. And what ends up happening with a lot of rare disorders is that we end up learning a whole lot about young kids, and we might learn about adolescents, and in a smaller group we might learn about transition to young adulthood. The older the individuals get, the less we know. And so being able to, I hope adults will come and participate even if they never come to a clinic, because that's really one of the only ways we're going to know what the adult needs are and what is working for adults. What helps improve the quality of life for adults with Angelman syndrome? That's something that we don't know because we don't have enough information about adults. So please consider that any adult data is going to be helpful as well. So
it's
Absolutely.
a beautiful answer. Yeah, go ahead, Liz. Sorry.
Well, and I will just echo that. The foundation is really committed to supporting individuals across the lifespan. We, are very interested at looking at therapeutics that will improve quality of life for adults with Angelman syndrome as well, but it's nearly impossible to do that without that natural history. And so I think it's just as critical in the adult population that we're gathering this information. I think I'd like to think that when adults come to the UNC clinic, that they're taking away helpful information still into adulthood, and whether that might be about services or benefits or really any of the medical challenges that their individual might be having or their adult might be having. I'd like to think that we can still be beneficial in that setting as well.
And that just reminded me, a very important person that we have on our clinic is our social worker, who is also fantastic at helping think about what services a family is eligible for, and that includes thinking about adult transitions and long-term planning for adults.
That's huge, because that's a question that comes up in our, at the foundation on a weekly basis of like, we're transitioning, what resources are out there, how do we do it? Because it can be really, really incredibly overwhelming. So that's awesome. The other thing too, I wanted to make sure the families know, because I think this is super cool, but part of the Ladder website that we have where people can enroll, there's a dashboard. Can families see that dashboard?
They can.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So soon we will have a link to the dashboard from, if you go to the Ladder website, there's information for families, there's information for researchers. We will have a link to that dashboard. Oh, it is actually, they did it today. Yay. Okay. So if you go to the for families, you'll see there's a bullet towards the bottom that has a click here to see general information about Ladder participants, and that will take you to the dashboard where it's interactive and it's updated in real time, the number of people who have signed up for Ladder, and then we have some basic information about the participants that are in Ladder, like
how many super cool.
Different age groups, how many of different molecular subtypes. So and ultimately we hope the dashboard will provide, we'll have a broader set of variables that families and researchers can go in and look at. So when we have sort of more definitive questions to things, we'll post them on the dashboard so people can see that.
Perfect. So I know we only have a few more minutes, but someone asked, I think this is a really important question to answer. Someone said, the Global Angelman Registry looks like it's out of Australia. Are you all linked? So maybe, Anne, if you want to talk about how we're linked, and Liz, maybe can you speak on the importance of the Global Angelman Registry and how this partnership is very important for us to be working together on this? So whoever wants to go first.
Go ahead, Anne, you can talk about.
Sure. So we have been working with the folks in the Global Angelman Syndrome Registry from the beginning, from the inception of Ladder, because we wanted it to be something that worked together, not competed with it. So the registry is absolutely critical because for many reasons, and I'm sure Liz will go into more detail, but really we want to have a really good understanding of the global impact of Angelman syndrome. So the registry is doing that. And the registry is in some ways doing some similar things to what we propose with Ladder, but what we're hoping is that if you participate in the registry and you enroll in Ladder, we will be able to use the registry data in Ladder as well. And so then they're going to talk to each other, and we'll be able to talk back to the registry to say, this is a question that's important. We need to ask it internationally, get it out there to everybody. So they will be able to have some back and forth to make this a more powerful and more international perspective.
Absolutely, yeah. Liz,
yeah, and I'll say, yeah, we worked really hard, as Anne said, to map as much of the data that we could so that, it's a really simple lateral transfer and it's easy to be able to, what parents are inputting in the Global Angelman Registry can flow easily into ladder in a useful and meaningful way. But the goal here was, again, is to reduce the burden on the families and to simplify and streamline this. The last thing that we want is for you to be going to a clinic, spending 4 hours filling out paperwork, to then go online, to the Global Angelman Registry to spend however many hours, probably not hours, but, however long it takes to have to upload all that same information, or vice versa. If you've already spent all that time getting it all into the Global Angelman Registry and then you show up in a clinic and they're asking for the same information, right? The goal is that this all gets streamlined across all of these platforms. So you show up somewhere and any of that information that we're asking for that's needed for clinical care gets pre-populated if you've already entered it somewhere else, whether that be the natural history study, whether that be ladder, Global Angelman Registry. So that's the goal, is really, again, to reduce parent burden. And we've worked really hard with the Global Angelman Registry to try to accomplish that. And, we hope to have a really clear path for collaboration.
Absolutely. So I know I could talk to you guys all night about this, because I think that the one thing that I'm proud of a lot of things, but the one thing that I'm very proud of with the Angelman Syndrome Foundation is the work we've done in the clinical space, and now working with RTI and with Ladder, because I think this is really, really important as we move forward. And maybe in closing for you guys, maybe Liz or Anne, if you can answer this, of like, in your opinion, why is having this clinical network and Ladder so important for the end goal of finding a treatment or, a therapeutics or a cure for Angelman syndrome? It's a big question.
I will say it's really hard for therapeutics to be successful without standardized care going into clinical trials, experts running clinical trials, and natural history data, all three of which are being accomplished through this clinical research network. That is our goal. And it's very hard for therapeutic trials to be successful without those three components. The ASF had the foresight to think about this, 5 years ahead of being in this clinical trial space, which is really fortunate. If we look at some of our other neurodevelopmental disease communities, there's been a lot of challenges with clinical trials. And so, I think this is a really critical asset for clinical trial success and the success of getting therapeutics approved.
And do you want to add anything? She answered it beautifully, but do you have anything to add? Right? Always does.
The only thing this is just to expound on what Liz already said, but I think the power behind what we're trying to do with Ladder and the clinical network is to really bring the whole community together, everybody, the researchers, the clinicians, the parents, everybody who has a stake in seeing good therapeutics developed for Angelman syndrome, and also symptom-focused therapies and recommendations that have empirical basis and we know have worked before. That's really important as a clinician, that feedback gets back to us. And I think when we have this type of setup where information is being provided by the true experts, you all, to the clinicians who are also talking to the researchers, and the researchers are filtering that information back to clinicians and back. Ultimately, that's the way we benefit everybody the most. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. So everyone watching now, make sure that you go to the Ladder website, which is posted in the comments, or you can find it on our website at the Angelman Syndrome Foundation. And I would love, if everyone who's watching right now signed up tonight, you would just totally make my day and make Anne's day as well. So, and also if you are mesmerized by listening to these beautiful ladies like I am, they will be making they're going to be popping up throughout the week next week for the Angelman Syndrome Foundation virtual conference. So if you haven't signed up for that conference, it's not too late. Please go to our website and sign up for that conference, and we'll be participating in the anxiety and behavior panel, which even in the chats tonight, some people have had some questions around anxiety and behavior and Angelman syndrome. And so Anne and a panel of experts are going to be talking about that. And Anne, I forgot which night it was. I feel like it's Thursday night, but I could be wrong.
Thursday.
Yeah,
Thursday
so
night.
next Thursday. And then Liz Gelazzo is going to be a part of the whole conference in some ways. She's speaking, she's moderating.
You'll be sick of me by the end of the week for sure.
Literally, yeah, exactly.
No more Liz Gelazzo.
If you want to know about medical care in AS, if you want to know about clinical trials, if you want to know about, IEPs, insurance, adult transition, whatever, there's something for you at the conference next week. So make sure you go check that out and look it up. I would encourage you all also to tune in on Sunday night to kick off the conference. You're going to be getting kind of a state of the ASF from me, and we have some exciting things to actually announce about the clinics that are coming soon that I think all of you will want to hear. So make sure you tune in for that. And I have to at least say one more thing that just have to make a plug, because the only way any of this can happen with Ladder and the clinic networks is that we continue to bring in dollars to the foundation, right? So if you haven't heard of Express Feedback for Good, we have a great campaign going right now to where all you have to do is give your feedback and we get money for it. So if you text ASF to 90412, and Catherine, if you can put that in the comments, you'll get a little message back and it'll say, give some feedback. And all you have to do is give feedback on local companies and whatever, and you can give up to 75 pieces of feedback, and we would get $125 per person. We can make up to $50,000 on this, y'all. That could cover 5 clinics for 1 year. Could also cover 50 families from getting a family fund grant. I mean, this is huge, and all you have to do is use your fingers on your phone and give feedback. So text ASF to 90412. I'm done giving my feedback. And Liz?
I struggled with this last year, but y'all are probably better than me. I'm not very good at it.
And Liz,
I'll go get online tonight and I'll do it.
So Liz, if you're not going to do it, you need to write a check to $125 to the ASF then.
Roger.
I'm on it.
I'm on it.
So thank you, Anne and Liz. I'm sorry I took a little bit more of your time tonight, but like I said, I could talk to you guys forever. Thank you for everyone who watched tonight. These happen monthly. Next month, I believe our topic is all about siblings. We're going to have some great sibling panels. We're going to announce some of our awesome sibling programs that are coming up, which I cannot wait to talk about. So thank you guys for coming tonight. Anne and Liz, thank you for all the contributions you're making to the Angelman community, and especially to the ASF. We love you guys. So have a great night, everyone. Go sign up for Ladder.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Anna.
guys.
Thank you.